Hello, everyone. Good evening, and thank you for joining us today. I am your host, Nikita Osborne, and I trust you have your tea with you. Today, I am chatting with Zoë Laydoo, the writer of A Time to Mourn blog. She will be sharing a bit of losing a loved one, where we will get a different perspective on this subject. Welcome, Zoe. I'm so excited to have you with me today.
Hi, Nikita. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. So we will have a wonderful time. As I shared earlier in this series, I have lost my mom back in August, and while I haven't really gotten the chance to mourn her loss and to really reflect on everything that happened, because I had to just jump back to school and my studies and everything. I didn't really have that time to reflect as much as I would like to, but I had a peace, you know that peace that comes from God, and I know it's really from God because I would not have been able to do that on my own. And I had that peace, and but in spite of that, I know that later down the road, after my studies is completed, I know it's a possibility that things can switch, things can change, and I ask myself sometimes if this is just the calm before the storm. But in spite of all that, I thank God for that peace, and I pray that day by day things will get better. So that's my hope. So as usual, before we get into it, let me give you a short introduction on my guest. Zoe is a 23-year-old mass communication student at the Ken Gordon School of Journalism and Communication at Custard. In October 2022, she launched the blog A Time to Mourn as a project for her social media communications class. A Time to Mourn explores Zoe's journey with grief after the sudden death of her father, and through it, she hopes she can help others who are grieving as well. An avid language lover, Zoe also previously studied Spanish at Custard. When she's not busy studying, she enjoys reading, writing, fitness, cooking, and movies. She describes herself as ridiculously organized, detail-oriented, committed, and determined, and passionate. So that's a bit on our guest Zoe, and I have placed the links to all her social media platforms in the description so you can follow and support her work. Welcome, Zoe, again.
Thank you.
So Zoe, as we begin, tell us a bit about yourself. I know I gave our listeners your bio. You tell us a bit about you, like when did you lose your dad, and a little backstory on that.
Right. So I lost my dad 4 years ago in January 2018 after he had a massive heart attack. It kind of came out of nowhere. He had an episode the year before, which we later found out was also a heart attack, but we didn't know it at the time. And he ended up in hospital, but he made a full recovery. After that, he was fine. He was back to normal. And then in January 2018, he had this massive heart attack and he died within about 20 minutes. So in a little over a month, it will be 5 years since he passed, which is unbelievable for me because I have a hard time wrapping my head around it because it feels like it happened just yesterday. So that's kind of the backstory behind that.
Yes, listen, I understand.
Yeah.
People say that time heals all wounds or pain, but as you said, it's almost 5 years, and you still can't really bring yourself to
Yeah.
terms with it. So
Yeah.
I understand that. And what was your initial thoughts process, at that moment?
Well, I was in full-fledged denial with a side of shock. I just kept thinking, no, no, he can't be dead. How could he possibly be dead? He was alive and completely fine just yesterday. I passed him watching TV in the living room like he always did. How could he be dead? Because I also had it in my head that the paramedics were going to revive him because we called an ambulance, right? So I
Yes.
fully expected that they would get here and that they would revive him. Uh, and it never once crossed my mind. It never occurred to me that he was going to die. And so, because I was convinced that they would bring him back without even thinking there was another option, when
Yes.
I realized that he had actually died, it was a huge mental 180-degree flip that I had to do in a split second. And I really did not know how to process it. Your whole life is flipped upside down in a matter of minutes. How do you how do you even begin to process that? I didn't know what to think, what to say, how to react, what to feel. And I went into a daze, I guess, just as a coping mechanism.
Yes.
And I just remember thinking, this isn't real. This is not real. This is just a bad dream because how could he have died? He
Right.
was 62 when he died. He would have been 63 the month after. And I think we tend to think our parents are going to be around forever, you know, um, and especially at that age that I was when it happened, I was 18. And so at that age, you definitely think your parents, not that they're immortal, but they're going to be around for a long time.
Yes, for a long time.
Yeah. And then for that to happen with no warning, it just left my head spinning.
Yes, I understand. And you said, we think that our parents would be around forever, and you're not thinking that this is going to change in a split second. And
Mhm.
that's kind of like the opposite for me, because my mom, she has been ailing actually for like
Yeah.
13 years, and she
Yeah.
has been just there. We would look at her day after day, and we would be like, God, what's this? What's the
Hmm.
reason for her just there in pain? And
Yeah.
and while you wouldn't think that your dad would be gone in a split second,
Hmm.
my mom has been there for like all these years,
Yeah.
and yet still, when it does happen, I understand. And when it
Hmm.
does happen, it still is like you still can't believe that
Yeah.
it's happening, So
Exactly.
after all these years, it's actually happened. So
Hmm.
sometimes I would look at a photo on my phone and I would say, Mommy, and I went like, Months, you're really gone, So
Yeah.
I understand. Even though
Yeah.
she was there for that long, I still can relate, So
That's the thing, whether it's expected or unexpected, it still affects you so deeply.
yes, yes. And I was going to ask you how long it took for you to come to terms, and you have already covered that, because that's the thing, it never really we can never really come to terms with death. So
Exactly.
I totally understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. And knowing that it's been 4 years, almost 5 years, that your dad has passed, do people ever tell you that it's been long enough, and that you should move on with your life, and how do you respond to that?
That's a very interesting question, actually. The answer is no. People don't tell me that it's been long enough. They don't tell me to move on with my life, mainly because I don't talk to them about his death. I'll talk to people about him and about his life. That's no problem. Like, I enjoy hearing stories that people have about him, but I don't talk to them about his death, and certainly not about my grief. I have kept that completely to myself until now, just because it is a very personal thing and I am a very private person. It's hard for me to show that vulnerable side and let people in. So, with the exception of my mom, people in my
Yes.
life don't actually know how I've reacted to it or the struggle it's been, because I tend to put on a happy exterior and
Yes.
play that
Yes.
everything is fine, you know? So they wouldn't tell me things like that because they simply don't know. I haven't let them know. Um,
Yes.
People would ask me after he died, "How are you doing?" And my automatic response would be, "I'm okay. I'm
I'm
okay."
okay. Yes. You
Yeah, and I
usually
think,
say I'm okay.
yeah, exactly. And I think part of that was me trying to convince myself that I was okay and that I wasn't struggling. I think it was part of me still being in denial.
Yes. I believe that, part of that is usually denial because sometimes we just don't want people to be like, hovering
Yeah.
and
And you don't want people to
always
feel
thinking
sorry for you and,
exactly.
yeah,
Yes, yes, exactly. That's it.
yeah,
We don't want people to feel sorry for us. So we
yes.
try our best to, always put on a happy face.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah. But in my
Absolutely.
case, I didn't really, it wasn't like a pretense for me. It kind of it came naturally. So
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't struggling. So
Yeah.
it was more or less natural for me. So it wasn't it wasn't that in my case. And
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to find out from you is that when that happened, yes, we are aware that God is love. God loves us. God cares about the
Mm-hmm.
things that concerns us. But
Yeah.
somewhere there, I wanted to know, were you angry with God at that moment?
No, no, that's the one thing that I can say with certainty about that entire experience. I was at no point angry with God. Faith has always been important in my life. It's how I grew up. And
Yes.
so, if anything, I had to lean on him a little bit more just to cope with it. So, being angry at him, blaming him for what happened was not a natural response for me. Instead, I very much realized that I needed him more than ever at that point if I was going to
Okay.
get through it. And I actually found, I would say, the most comfort in him, and I would say that it actually drew me closer to him, which was one of the very few positives that came out of that situation. I've always believed that, everything happens for a reason and
Exactly.
that it's part of God's plan and that He's in control and He allows things to happen for a purpose, even if
Exactly.
even if I couldn't understand the reason at the time, even if I didn't know what that purpose was, I had to trust that, he would take care of us, and he really has. And I fully believe that he's made me a lot stronger through it.
Very good. Very good. And you said something there, and that is true because there's a purpose for everything, even if
Yeah.
we may not understand it. It's
Yes.
difficult for us to understand because God's ways are higher than our ways,
Hmm.
and He always knows best, even
He
though
does.
we may not understand it. We don't want to
Exactly.
understand it at
Yeah.
times. So, but at the end of it all, we know that God is in control and He knows what's best for us. And
Yes.
it's difficult, totally, totally difficult for a mere human to understand death and say,
Yes.
to say with a true heart that, oh, this is God's purpose.
Hmm.
Especially if someone is like, not like my mom lying on a bed ailing for 13 years, but
Yeah.
in the case of your dad, it is hard for someone to really come to terms with that and just
Yeah.
accept it. So we
Well, that's
have
the
to
thing.
face the reality of that.
Yeah. And I think that's where faith comes into play even more when you don't understand something, and you just have to find a way to accept it and find a way to understand what the purpose is.
Exactly, exactly. That's why we really have to lean on our faith, and I'm glad you
Hmm.
said that because it is a fact. If we don't
Yeah.
have our faith, if we don't trust, continue to believe in God
Hmm.
and believe that He knows what's best for us, then
Yeah.
it is going to be a difficult road. So we have to continue
Hmm.
to keep that faith and know that
Yeah.
at the end of the day, it is going to be well, and then we can truly say that it is well with our soul.
Because it's so easy to get, you know, to it's an upheaval basically when someone dies, you go through that kind of upheaval emotionally and mentally and even physically sometimes. And like for me, that faith was an anchor that kept me grounded and not just like, spiraling out of control.
Right. Yes, yes. Exactly, exactly. And I wanted to know, I know you said even in when you mentioned in your blog, um there were things that, like probably unresolved things between you and your dad, and I
Yeah.
wanted to know, like, did you have any regrets, or what are some of those regrets, if you would like to speak about those?
Yeah, of course. I regret not spending more time with him. I like you said, I brought it up in my blog where we did have a fairly strained relationship, and I regret not fixing that, not making more of an effort. I regret taking him for granted and not appreciating him enough and not showing him more appreciation or enough appreciation. So there are definitely regrets there. And for me, it's probably been, I would say, the hardest part of the grieving process, dealing with those regrets and, knowing that I will never have the chance to resolve them or reverse them. It's all the what ifs and the would haves and could haves and should haves that really get me. All the things that I would have wanted to say or do or ask if I knew that he didn't have much time left. So I think it's definitely been a huge and very powerful lesson in, appreciating the people that you have while you have them, because they can be taken away so easily, as I learned the hard way.
Exactly. That's very true because
Yeah.
when you said that, it really brought back some thoughts, and it is true because when you don't spend enough time with your loved ones and something such as death occur, there's no going back. And
No.
I truly believe that that is part of that is part of the fact one factor that
Mhm.
really adds to the the grieving, or the
Yeah.
grieving process, and that is part of what makes it difficult to really come to terms, and
Yes.
it really kind of like it will stretch out the process because
Hmm.
of the fact that you keep beating yourself up about
Yeah.
not being able to, to say the things that you should have said before.
Yeah.
Um, hmm
And just that knowing that, for people like with you, how your mom was sick for so long, you had time with her, even though she was suffering. You had
Exactly.
time and you were able to, kind of make your peace with it and talk to her and have those conversations and so on. But when it happens so suddenly like that, and you have no idea that the expiration date is so close, so to speak, um,
Yes.
you have no idea. Like that day before, I had no idea that was going to be his last day alive. And you kind of wonder, well, if I did know, what would I have done differently? And I that's something that keeps coming back to me a lot, especially during this process of doing the blog and everything. It's, what would I have said to him? What would I have asked him if I knew that he had less than 24 hours left?
Exactly. Yes. I totally understand because
Yeah.
that is what really makes you feel the pinch. So,
Hmm.
I totally get that. And
Yeah.
what are some of the things that you miss most about your dad?
I mean, there are a few things, and it's always the little things, like him, the sound of him stirring his coffee ever so loudly first thing in the morning. No, but the number one thing I miss most would probably be his sense of humor. He had a ridiculous sense of humor, just the corniest, driest jokes imaginable. Your typical dad jokes.
Yes.
Um, and the most entertaining part in all of that was never the joke itself, it was his reaction to the joke because he would always be the one laughing hardest and most scandalously at his own
At
joke.
his own joke.
Yes. So it's moments like that that I would miss, because he would always set the rest of us off and we would just be laughing because of his reaction to his joke. Um, and then, he was always so supportive of whatever I was doing, whether it was school or gymnastics. He always wanted me to excel and to be the best that I could be. And that applies to both my parents, both my mom and my dad. I knew that I wouldn't disappoint them once I did my best. They've both told me in the past that they would be proud of me no matter what once I put my all into it, regardless of the outcome. And I knew that the only way I would disappoint them is if I didn't give it my very best. And I still have that in my mom, thankfully, which I'm so grateful for. But it's one of the things that I miss with my dad, having his support, being able to share achievements with him, even just small ones. And certainly the big ones, like when I graduated last year, I definitely felt his absence a lot more.
Yes, yes. And there are other milestones that
Hmm.
you would reflect on his loss
Yeah,
as well, and it is going to sting. So
absolutely.
yeah, I understand that. And
Yeah.
so what do you like? What do you do to ease the pain of losing your dad in moments like these?
But before I would hardly ever, very rarely allow myself to give in to the pain. And so I didn't have much of a need to ease it before. But since I started this project, I have had to give in to it a few times because it's been an emotional journey. Sometimes writing the blog posts, it can be tough.
Yes,
But ironically, to ease it, I write more. I work on the project more because in many ways it has been so therapeutic.
exactly.
Writing has always been an outlet for me. It's the way I express myself the best. It's the way I come to understand myself the best. I've been keeping a journal since I was 8 or 9. And things, feelings, thoughts make more sense to me when I can put them on paper.
Exactly,
So,
I can
yeah,
relate.
exactly. Yeah. So,
Mm,
you know where I'm coming from.
yes.
So, being able to do that has definitely helped to ease that a lot. And then I would also say going back and watching old family movies, seeing him, hearing his voice again, that helps a lot too in those times when I feel the loss a bit more acutely. For example, I remember the birthday that I had after he died. He died in January, my birthday is in April. So when I turned 19 that April,
Mm,
I it was tough. I was really missing him. And I put on a video that we have of my first birthday when I turned 1. And my parents
mm.
took me to the zoo. My mom baked me a cake. And we have all of that on video. So watching it helped to fill that void a little bit on that day when it was particularly hard.
Yes, yes, and that's one thing that is really is helpful. And I always say, when we keep the memories alive, by
Yeah,
keeping the memories alive, it really helps to really
it
ease
does.
the pain because when you feel sad about the loss of your loved one, and you remember the good things, remember the things that they used to say, and
Mm-hmm.
you laugh about it. You bring
Yes.
yourself to a place where you would no longer be sad, but you would be able
Mm.
to laugh about the things that they used to say or they used
Yeah.
to do, because that's what I do with my mom. It doesn't have a
Yeah.
day that goes by that I don't remember something that she did or something she would
Mm-hmm.
say, and
Yeah.
it really helps. It really helps.
Yeah, I can relate because we do that too. Sometimes my mom would say, "Hey, your father used to say so and so."
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. And as we come to the end of this program, this episode actually, I wanted to ask you what would you say? What would you say to someone who can't seem to get over a loss, even if it's 4 months or 4 years? What would you say to someone in that position?
You know, I would say loss is not something to get over. I don't think that's the goal. There's a difference between getting over something and healing from something. Big difference. But the thing with loss, and this has become almost like a catchphrase for me throughout this project, but grief and loss are very, very personal, and everyone deals with it differently, individually. There's no guidebook when it comes to loss, there are no rules, and there's certainly no timeline for it. So I would encourage anyone who's struggling with loss to remember that, um, to not avoid it, to be open to it, and to not compare their grief with anyone else's, because it is uniquely theirs, because their relationship with that person was uniquely theirs.
Exactly.
But yeah, but most of all, I think I would say to be patient with themselves in their journey with grief, to not put pressure on themselves to get over it just because a certain time frame has elapsed. That doesn't make any sense. You know, it doesn't matter how long it's been, whether it's 4 months, 4 years, 10 years even. The truth is that grief and loss is always going to be there in some form. You're always going to miss that person, especially if you were close to them. So I would say don't think of it as a bad thing, a negative thing, something to get over or get rid of. Think of it as proof of how deeply that person touched your life.
Exactly. Wonderfully said. Wonderfully said. And so, listeners, as we heard, loss is something that we all handle differently. And while I may experience peace in the midst of the storm, someone else may be struggling to cope with it. So let's be empathetic towards each other in a time of loss. So keep that in mind as we go forward. Thank you, Zoe, for spending this evening with us. And
Uh,
thank you, my listeners, for tuning in. Zoe, do you have any final words you want to say to our listeners before we leave?
no, I just want to thank everyone for listening, for tuning in, for supporting your podcast, and to you, Nikita, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure. And sometimes all you need is just to talk to someone about your experience, especially if it's someone who can understand, who has been through a loss as well. I think we underestimate how therapeutic it can really be to actually talk about it and not keep it locked up inside. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Oh, you are most welcome, Zoe. Have a good evening. Have a
Same to
good
you.
evening, everyone.